Well, joining me now, Defence and Security Analyst Professor Michael Clarke. And Michael, I want to talk to you about those airstrikes because we're learning a bit more about the fallout from them. The President saying around 85 has struck across the country. And in terms of the damage they're doing, talk to us about what we know, what's coming out of Ukraine today.
Yes, I mean, this is just the same as the Russians did when the Kerch Strait Bridge was hit. 2 days later, about 100 airstrikes, missiles and drones all across the country. This looks to be about the same sort of level in places that we know of so far, Lviv, Zatimir, Kiev, Kharkiv, going for critical infrastructure, but also quite a lot of civilian sites. They don't kill so many people, but they certainly dehouse a lot of people. And it's revenge, because that's what the Kremlin wants to show. But it's also part of the domestic argument in Russia. It's to give the Russians some sense that the war is going on, is vigorous, even though the news from Kherson is quite bad. So it's partly a distraction technique as well. And
just looking over the border of Ukraine into Moldova, we're hearing about large power outages in Moldova. That news just coming into us this afternoon, which gives you a sense of obviously how the region is so linked and the danger, not just to Ukraine, but further afield as well.
It is. Moldova has in it a breakaway region that's not declared itself breakaway yet, Transnistria, with a Russian minority. It was the headquarters of the old 14th Army in the Red Army days. Moldova is a very, I don't want to call it unstable, but its stability is always in some doubt. And what happens in Ukraine really affects Moldova. And it's not surprising that their infrastructure is so linked. Life is tough in Moldova, as it is, and they're right on the edge of a war zone. It's not doing them any good at all.
Yeah, and they're feeling the effects of those airstrikes and, you know, as you said, the targeting of critical infrastructure. Let's talk about Kherson and obviously the retreat of Russian troops there. But where do those troops go? Talk to us about what's happening around Kherson and further afield.
Yes, I mean, Kherson itself, the Russians got about 30,000 troops out of the area, and they did it pretty well, clandestinely at night, on civilian vehicles. They had civilian buses, military buses, civilian buses, military buses going in convoys. It looked as if they were getting civilians out, but they weren't. They were getting military out alongside them. They did it really rather cleverly. They seem to have got most of the 30,000 out. My guess is they want to send most of those troops up to the Donbass, where they will make some difference, because these are quite good troops that they had there. And my guess is that they will want to try to hold this position on the east bank of the Dnieper River while they send the bulk of troops up to where the fighting is now really fierce in the Donbass. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have crossed to the south side of the river. We didn't think that they would at this stage, but they're keeping going. And so they've landed, we know now, on the Kinburn Peninsula, and they're moving along the Kinburn Peninsula, and the Russians look as if they're putting up a defence west of Rybalche. The Ukrainians, we know, are in Hirosky, and so somewhere on that narrow neck of land, only about 4 kilometres wide, there is now a battle going on. And also the Russians expect the Ukrainians to try to cross onto the south side at Novokakhovka. That looks like a pretty big thing. If they do, that's a big operation if they make it, but the Russians certainly think they're going to try. So the Ukrainians are keeping the battle going. They're not sitting on their laurels. They're trying to pressurise Russian forces to get them to pull back even further, get them out of artillery range of the city of Kherson for a start. And there are all sorts of rumours going on about what's happening in between Novokakhovka and the Kinburn Peninsula. And I think in the next 48 hours, we'll hear a lot more about what's going on along that river.
Yeah, a lot going on in the region around Kherson. In Kherson itself, mooted celebrations with his esteemed President Zelensky in there, some sense of relief, but it's the Donbass that we're looking at as well. You mentioned the Donbass region, and while there is some sense of celebration in Kherson, I mean, far from it in the Donbass.
Yeah. You know, when he was celebrating in Kherson, I mean, President Zelensky, I thought he had the 1,000-yard stare of warfare. I mean, people talk about this, the 1,000-yard stare that soldiers develop. And that's what he had. And he said, it is hell in the Donbass. And he's not wrong, because there is fighting going on all along this front. The Russians are pushing really hard at places like Marivka, at Pavlivka near to there, at Bakhmut. The Wagner group have been launching endless attacks on Bakhmut. And these are almost human wave attacks. They're just putting convicts, in the case of the Wagner group, and mobilised soldiers in the front line. The reserves are behind them, with instructions to shoot them if they pull back or they withdraw. And the real battle is going on between Svatove and Kreminna, because the Ukrainians are determined to take this P66 highway, which is critical for reasons that you can see as you see it on the map. And the Ukrainians are quite close to actually taking that highway, more or less in the middle between Svatovia and Kreminna, and to take both places. But they haven't managed it yet. And the Russians are fighting tooth and nail to hang on to Svatovia and Kreminna, because if they lose it, particularly Kreminna, that is the gateway to Donetsk, to the second part of the republic, the gateway to Severodonetsk. Remember that? 100 days. I mean, if they get to Kreminna, they can get round the back of Severodonetsk, and all sorts of other things become possible. But the Russians are not going to give that up easily.
OK, Michael, thank you, Professor Michael Clarke, with the latest there on what's unfolding on the ground in Ukraine.